Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are glad you are here, and just by showing up, you're already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I am leaning into the world of ticketing by presenting two experts on the subject, but that is not the only thing we will explore by a long shot. As usual, I promise you will leave smarter and more enlightened than you arrived. Before we get started, please let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day throughout the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Turnkey ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And please ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those directly as we can throughout the session. And finally, please make sure that your chat is set to address everyone, not just the host and speakers. I want to thank our program sponsors, for without their support, we could not keep this series free. Special thanks to First Horizon Bank, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, MedJet, Project Music, Better Than Booze, and Tennessee Brew Works. Thank you to all of you. So let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome David McKay. David is the co-founder and CEO of the artist ticketing company called Seated. He started his career working for CAA talent agent Matt Gale, who manages Shawn Mendes, My Chemical Romance, and he also ran digital for Matt's record label called Photo Finish Records. David then joined the founding team at Applause and ran the ticketing business from launch until its acquisition by Ticketmaster in late 2016. David started Seated in 2017 to empower artists to take control of their ticketing experience. Seated has now become a crucial part of the touring business for clients such as John Mayer, Megan Thee Stallion, John Legend, The Chainsmokers, Harry Styles, Brandi Carlile, and Green Day. Seated was acquired by Sofar Sounds in 2021. And joining David as today's featured guest is my good friend, Vito Iaia. Vito is Chief Revenue Officer of Axis, the ticketing arm of global live entertainment powerhouse AEG. In this role, he oversees all revenue efforts for the company, including primary market ticketing, sponsorships, and resale. Vito is a live entertainment veteran, having spent his entire career at the forefront of the evolution of the fan experience, evangelizing products such as dynamic pricing, identity-based ticketing, peer-to-peer resale, true fan access, and others. In addition to AEG, he served as an executive in both domestic and international roles for companies such as Warner Media, Live Nation, the Washington Nationals Baseball Club, and Ticketmaster. Additionally, he is a 4X entrepreneur and serves as a board member or advisor to multiple live entertainment companies. Vito is based in the New York metro area and holds degrees from UVA and Northwestern University. It is a pleasure to welcome these two rock stars to our platform today. Take it away, boys.
Thanks, Tom.
I don't know if we can beat that, David.
I know. Fantastic introduction. I think that's the webinar. You learned everything you need to know about us. But in all seriousness, I'll take on my role as host and just kick things off. What I'm hoping to get out of this conversation, Vito, you and I have conversations from time to time, whether it's on the phone quickly or in an official capacity in a meeting or running into each other at a conference. And we rarely have the opportunity to sit down and kind of like really dive deep into each other and each other's experience. There's usually like business at hand. And so really looking forward to learning a bit more about your career and your journey to where you are today. I know you just recently accepted a new role at Access. I'm really curious to dive into that because you and I haven't had an opportunity to really talk about what those responsibilities are going to be or what you're excited about there. And then you've been in this industry longer than I have, and I'm really curious about what your vision is for the future of ticketing and from a technology standpoint, but also from a business standpoint. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
I am as well. And maybe it makes sense to, and thank you for that, David. Maybe it makes sense to just set the table by talking about how we got here. So Tom asked me a few months back if I would be on his podcast, take it back, webinar. And I said, sure, of course. I love Tom to pieces, and we've known each other a long time. So that was an easy yes. And then maybe a week later, he's like, so who are you gonna have interview you? And I said, oh, I thought you interviewed me. And he's like, nope, that's not how it works. You pick your own person. So when he said that, I started just kind of doing an audit of who I might want to join me for this. And I basically had three buckets of people. The first one was like, people that I learned from, my former bosses and my mentors in the industry, people like David Goldberg, David Marcus, and others. Then when there was like a peer bucket, like people that kind of came up through the industry with me. And then lastly, there was this kind of up and coming bucket of executives. And we don't, I think it's fair to say, David, we don't know each other super well. Like we're not super best friends. We don't see each other all that much, but you've been, and always have been, someone that I think we first met when I was running Full Screen Live. You came in and you were still with Applause back then. And I was impressed in the first meeting. And then every time we met after that, and watching your trajectory as you continue to build businesses in live entertainment and successfully sell them off and continue to build new ones. Just been very impressed by you. And I think you're one of the young, I've said this before, one of the young bright stars in the industry. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna choose Dave, and I think we'll have a lot to talk about, probably because we don't know each other super well. So then you and I got on the phone with Tom, and Tom said, okay, it's not really an interview. You guys just chop it up together. I was like, okay. So Tom kind of boiled the frog on me a little bit. First, I thought he was going to interview me. Then I had to find my own interview, and now I find it's not an interview at all, which frankly is going to be a whole lot easier for me. I'd rather just have a chat and feel a little less nervous to answer a million questions. But anyway, that's a little bit about how we got here today.
Well,
thank you for joining.
I appreciate you saying that, and I think I'm gonna like clip that 30 seconds and send it to my mom so she understands what I do and that she's finally proud of me. So I appreciate those kind words. And so, yeah, the first time we did meet was when you were Full Screen, but your career started before that, and I was aware of you before you were aware of me because I'm a bit of a nerd of like research and reading and soaking as much information as I can, and I love watching the 5-hour congressional testimonies of anything related to live entertainment or music. And in your capacity at Ticket Web and Live Nation, you were in that seat at one point, 15 years ago. So I was aware of you. And then the first time that we met was through Full Screen, but I'd love to kind of like take a step back, 20 years to kind of you starting your career. I'd love to learn about the journey and what put you in that seat a few years later.
Sure. Only if you promise to do the same after I tell my story.
For sure.
So I did not start off my career in live entertainment. I actually started it off in finance and used business school as a mechanism to career switch into live entertainment, because I think I knew deep down inside that I wasn't meant to be in finance. I just don't think I thought I was going to get into a good business school if I don't know, worked at a record label, whatever. Maybe that was true, maybe it wasn't. So coming out of business school, I went to business school in Northwestern, which is not a great city to try to get into the live entertainment industry from. Right? Chicago is not known for having a rich live entertainment background or depth of company. So it wasn't easy to get a gig in live entertainment, but I was able to get a internship with a company called Jeff McCluskey and Associates after that was the summer between my 2 years at Northwestern. And then after I graduated Northwestern, I came back to McCluskey, and I was hired by the newly hired CEO, a guy named David Marcus, who we both know very well. And he'd introduced me to a gentleman named David Goldberg. They were buddies in Chicago. David Goldberg obviously had already had a long career in live entertainment, Jam Productions, Tunes.com, et cetera. And the three of us decided we wanted to start a company together. That company was very short-lived, like days, weeks, months, like before we actually folded it, because David Goldberg had received an offer from Ticketmaster to move to Los Angeles and run worldwide strategy. I was fortunate that David Goldberg offered me a job to join him. So I was still unattached and fairly young. So I made the move from Chicago to Los Angeles in 2003 as director of strategy and business development for Ticketmaster. It was kind of an undefined role. It was just trying to figure out, if there was a company that needed to be acquired or a partnership that needed to be done. That generally came to me and the other members of the business development and strategy team. And then it was an interesting time because the biggest contract Ticketmaster held was a company then called Clear Channel Entertainment, now called Live Nation. This was before Live Nation owned Ticketmaster. They represented something ridiculous, like 15 to 20% of Ticketmaster's revenue. So Ticketmaster obviously wanted to renew that contract. Live Nation wanted a more participatory stake in the consumer experience. So they were chasing all kinds of avenues, whether they were thinking about buying a ticketing company or partnering with a ticketing company or potentially renewing with Ticketmaster. In any case, both companies were trying to give themselves leverage in the upcoming contract renewal negotiation. So one of the things David Goldberg did to increase Ticketmaster's leverage in that negotiation is he started a team that spoke directly to artist representatives, which was named the Music Services Team. So before that, Ticketmaster never really, in the value chain, Ticketmaster services, the venues, they never had direct communication with artist representatives, but that was what David Goldberg set to build. So, instead of, doing M&A deals and figuring out how we can do a deal with, Yahoo or Amazon or whoever for affiliate ticketing, I started focusing on, and a few other members of that team started focusing on speaking to artists to further their touring profitability and fan experience. So at this point, Ticketmaster was launching all kinds of, back then, very new technologies that were enabling dynamic pricing and or trying to thwart scalping. And it was my job, and David Marcus eventually came to Los Angeles. Dave Marcus's job, Greg Schmalley, who I work with now again at AEG, a dear friend. Our job was to fly around the country, around the world, and try to convince band managers, band agents, and sometimes bands themselves, but we rarely spoke directly to the artists, to enable these technologies to A, increase the gross of the show, B, keep brokers and scalpers out, C, upsell your new recorded music digitally or your new fan club digitally, an area that I know you're super passionate about. Eventually that role morphed into, we had, incredible success, because when you're helping artists make more money, that's an easy thing to sell. We had incredible success building that division up. We were working with every major tour within a couple of years. I was asked to move to Europe and rebuild that team over there. So from 07 to 09, I went to London and rebuilt the music services team over there. Then I came back to the States. When I came back to the States, because my bosses, David Goldberg and David Marcus, left, I had an opportunity to run global music services, and they also made me CEO of TicketWeb, a company you mentioned before that is a wholly owned subsidiary of Ticketmaster based in San Francisco. So at that point, the acquisition or merger, depending on how much you believe of it, of Live Nation and Ticketmaster had begun. Irving had put and Rapino had put those wheels in motion. So there was a lot of turmoil at the Ticketmaster offices. And to answer your question, like the longest fucking way possible, when someone had to go to speak in front of the Senate in 2010 on what was then known as paperless ticketing, but any legislation that we could enact that would theoretically reduce scalper and broker activity, I got the call, and 35-year-old kid standing in front of the Senate trying to convince them not to pass broker legislation. We failed, by the way. They ended up, StubHub and SeatGeek and Viagogo and those guys ended up passing the legislation they wanted to pass. But yeah, it was a fun little.
And obviously, like, in part, the reason why they passed some of that legislation is because they have these lobbying groups that can act collectively together, whereas artists kind of act more independently and don't have that lobbying voice. And I think we're starting to see some changes there now that we don't need to dive into in this conversation. But there's a lot that's different 15 years later, but there's a lot that's the same. I'm curious what your take is on that. Like, how much do you see is different from it was 15 years ago when you were sitting in that seat versus how much is the same?
It's, first of all, very well said. Secondly, it's funny that you use the words "so much is changing, so much is the same." So I left Ticketmaster in 2010, and I did startups for 14 years until I took this job a few months ago. And now that I'm back in ticketing for the first time in a decade and a half, I find myself saying that exact same sentence all the time. Like, the conversations, yes, as an industry, we have evolved. There's far more dynamic pricing. Like, the artists, dude, when we were trying to sell this shit back in 20 years ago in 2003, 2004, 2005. The only artists that had really broken that like $1,000 per ticket cap were Barbra Streisand and the Eagles. And now forget about it. Like everyone's dynamically pricing the front of the house. So, but I will say that like, a big chunk of my job is still trying to get stakeholders, whether those stakeholders are buildings, promoters, artists themselves, sports teams, et cetera, to get over this notion that secondary is going to cannibalize their sales. And look, for the past 14 years, I've been doing startups where I have been taking risk on the inventory. I've been a promoter and looked after sports teams and things like that. So I get that fear, that idea that if I allow or embrace secondary, then someone's going to buy a ticket that's already been bought instead of buying a ticket that I need them to buy to make back the guarantee that I've offered to the artist or the guarantee that I've offered to the licensee or whatever. But inevitably, that's just not the way it works. The fan will buy the ticket that they need to buy when they need to buy it. And if you're not going to offer it to them, they're going to get it somewhere else. So yeah, those fights, they're not done. We haven't gotten there yet. This industry still has, thank God, a lot of work to do. Otherwise, people like you and I probably wouldn't have jobs. But there's still a lot of grass to mow out there.
Yeah, and like, I mean, you brought up like all the different stakeholders from your business perspective. I'll call you a venue ticketing company. Maybe that's not the proper term, but like your client is the venue, but there are other stakeholders. There's the artists, there's the fans, and like, how do you balance the needs of those when your client is the venue, but you need to kind of serve the fans and also serve kind of the needs of the artists, even though they're not your clients?
Well, I mean, this is the value chain is condensed incredibly, right? Because now it used to be artist, manager, agent, promoter, building, ticketing company, fan. That's the way the decision making flowed. And now so many of those pieces have become one piece, right? For the most part, you see a lot of promoters that own buildings. Some promoters manage artists, and et cetera, and they own ticketing companies, right? I mean, Access is owned by AEG, right? So a lot of that value chain is condensed. And to think that the incentives were so misaligned way back then that people wouldn't be trying to enact technologies and programs that were going to benefit everyone. Ultimately, the people on the end of the value chain are the most important, the artist and the fan, right? Companies that aren't doing that are companies that are no longer around. And maybe this is a good place to pivot into a little bit of your background, David, because, artist ticketing, and I'll put that in quotes because I'm sure you call it something different, has been around for a while, right? And it started off almost as this, I mean, the Grateful Dead were doing it decades ago. But when it started getting really, I guess, normalized was when, Pearl Jam did what they did with Ticketmaster. And then you saw the lawsuits starting to come, string cheese incidents to Ticketmaster. And then you start seeing these carve outs and these exceptions getting made in the live entertainment industry, especially around concerts, where the artist could take some chunk of the house and sell it directly to the fan. And for the most part, it's 8 to 10% of the house, that for those that aren't familiar with this space, 8 to 10% of the house can get pulled by the artist and sold on some sort of legitimate fan club. There are a few exceptions. I think Pearl Jam can sell 25%, and then Dave Matthews, Grateful Dead, String Cheese, and Fish can each sell 50%. But for the most part, a band can take between 8 and 10% of the inventory and sell it directly. And that spurred this sort of cottage industry of companies that were popping up and taking advantage of this new latitude that was being offered by the major ticketing companies. They were shelling out all this money for, major long-term contracts with venues. And again, like, I'm not sure all of it was done necessarily in the name of the artist by some of these companies, but you've found a way to make this work, right? I feel like a lot of them were looking to get acquired, and some of them did, a lot of them didn't. But maybe you can help us understand a little bit about what made some of the visions that you've had vis-a-vis this space different and differentiated, because you've demonstrated a repeated pattern of success, and you are, a lot of people don't like companies like yours in the industry. There's a little bit of a Moneyball thing to it, right? Like, hey, what's this new thing going on over here? But that's not really true with you. You have a really solid reputation in the industry. So I'm going to shut up now and just let you talk for a bit.
Yeah, and I'm not sure the best place to start, but I guess the beginning is the best place to start. I've only always worked for artists. When I was in college, I was managing bands. We got them signed to record deals. We were when I first started working for McKay at Photo Finish Records and Atlantic Records, we're representing artists. And then when I went to kind of join the founding team of Applause, our customer and our client was the artist. And that's always because I felt that the artist is the most important part of the equation. And maybe the artist is not the most important part of the equation from a long-term business perspective. Maybe shelling out a bunch of cash and buying exclusive venues, buying up the rights to exclusive venues is a better business strategy. And that's a better part of the business calculation. But from a fan experience, from an emotional standpoint, the artist is more important. And I think as a result, there hasn't been, or you talked about it, there are a couple companies that have popped up over the years that have maybe had ulterior motives or a quick cash grab, but there, in my opinion, there wasn't a company that was focusing on the most important part of the equation, the artist. There wasn't from a ticketing perspective. And so plenty of companies out there servicing venues didn't want to compete. Plenty of companies that are out there servicing the fans from a secondary standpoint or consumer experience standpoint, and some that kind of meld both. But from an artist perspective, no one really servicing the true full needs of an artist. And the biggest problem that I saw, even from the companies that did have divisions that were servicing artists, was kind of this gatekeeper mentality around the data. And that if we give the artist the data, then we lose all of our leverage. And we took the exact opposite approach. And I think 7 years later, that's why we found success at Seated is we believe that the artist deserves the right to the data because they're the best marketers in the world. And if you hand that data to them, the whole ecosystem rises because they're going to be better at selling tickets than any one of us sitting in some room that's not unrelated to the artist. And so our whole role at Seated is help the artist capture more data around their live events, and then using that data, help them sell more tickets and generate more revenue. And the reason why I believe that's so important is because throughout history, artists have never had access to that data in any aspect of their business. So, going back decades, obviously, nobody had access to that data. You're buying a physical product in Best Buy, or going to the box office and you're paying in cash for a ticket. Like, nobody knows who the customer is at all. Then the internet comes around, and through iTunes and streaming and through digital ticketing, someone starts to know who the customer is. The venue, the ticketing company, the promoter, the DSP, iTunes, Apple, like, they know who the customer is, but the talent behind it all still has no direct relationship with their customer. So a long way of saying everything that I stand for, everything that I believe should be true, and everything that we're doing at Seated is empowering the artist with that data. And I think that's why we've built such a trust and such a relationship with the artists, is because we've stayed true to that, and they found that valuable.
That's awesome. And tell me a little bit about, I mean, your batting average right now on selling startups is it's 1,000, right? I mean, you're doing very well. Tell me a little bit about the I guess transition from being a CEO of a company that's independent and that you own a big piece of or all of, to having been acquired, going to basically work for somebody, whether it's during an earn-out period or maybe you plan to be there for a long time, and how that works and how you reconcile like why you originally started the company with where you are.
Yeah, it's a really important question and doesn't get talked about enough. And I probably don't talk about it enough. And I'm still at our parent company so far. So keeping that in mind, you say my batting average is 1,000. I've been a part of multiple different types of acquisitions and different transactions, and I've seen it from a lot of different perspectives. Seated was the only company that I personally founded and sold, but so still 1,000, one of one. I saw Matt start Photo Finish Records, partner with Atlantic Records, do really well, and then Atlantic kind of puts their hands in, brings us into their office, and we work as like a hand-in-hand partner and share resources, and they really give us leverage. And I saw how a really successful partnership can work. I was on the founding team of Applause when Irving came in and said, I want to acquire this. And Live Nation said, you can acquire it if we also partner with it, and they each put up 50% of the cash and then spun it into Ticketmaster eventually. So I wasn't a founder of that company. I was on the founding team and I saw that journey. And so doing it myself for the first time, a lot of different emotions. I mean, when you start a company, and this as an entrepreneur, and I'd love to dive into that next, like when you start a company, sometimes if you get in this emotion, especially if you're in like the Silicon Valley VC game of raising capital to show growth, to raise capital to show growth, and then you're just basically adding more people into your life that are asking for eventual liquidity, where they're like, all right, like you're gonna have to sell someday, you're gonna get acquired, you're gonna IPO, whatever it is. And so like your job as a CEO, which started as, I see this problem, I see this opportunity, I see something that excites me, something that I want to do, and it turns into, your fiduciary responsibility to appease your shareholders, and then like you get into this like, how do I get acquired? How do I chase that? And so the answer to your question is like what it's been like is, I got in that mentality of like, okay, well, I start seeded because I think I can sell it someday. And that's going to be my huge opportunity. I mean, we didn't pay ourselves, I think, for the first 12 or 18 months or something, as co-founders. Obviously we paid our staff. But we didn't, where we started at seeded changed over time. And when we sold our company to SoFar, the quick story is, Jim Lucchese, who I have immense respect for, was CEO of SoFar. And I met him initially when he was at Spotify. He was CEO of the Echo Nest, sold the Echo Nest to Spotify, went to go lead the creator team at Spotify. And then I met him and Shane Tobin at the time as well. And we were talking a lot while they were at Spotify about different ways that artists and ticketing kind of worked could potentially work with Spotify, and really built immense respect for those two. And then when Jim got recruited to be CEO of SoFar, the conversation just naturally started happening with the same people, just over at a different company. And long story short, they put an attractive offer together, and we decided to sell the company to SoFar, kind of with some of the promise of, we're going to maintain seeded and what it's doing and how well it's going, and going to fuel the growth of that and share some resources and a lot of upside opportunity that we saw. But from an emotional standpoint, as a founder, you kind of like think that this thing that you were running towards for 4 or 5 years or longer was the thing that's going to make you happy. And it's the whole, like, it's the journey, not the destination thing. It's like the journey of like starting something from scratch and seeing it being utilized by millions of fans, or like some of your favorite artists. Like, I got the first live show I ever went to by myself without my parents was John Mayer in 2000 at the small club Mississippi Nights in St. Louis. It doesn't exist anymore. I think it was like 800 cap. And then then we start working with John Mayer, and we do like pre-sale registrations and Power's website and all these different things. And it's like that gratification and that excitement of creating something that didn't exist, seeing it used by people that you really respect or admire, and millions of fans, is very, very different than the gratification you get from a check and then someone taking something away from you, So it's all been good, and we really like respect and love the team at SoFar, our parent company. But from a founder emotional perspective, it's very kind of you have two sides of it. I'm curious about
that's great information. And look, maybe I just because you mentioned John Mayer, and maybe because people might get totally bored if we just talk about ourselves the whole hour, I'll tell a really quick, funny John Mayer story. So the way I got into this industry is when I was at Northwestern, I was trying to just find a way to break in. And there was an alumnus that had gone to Northwestern, to Kellogg, and a few years before me. His name was Greg Latterman. He was the CEO of a label called Aware Records. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, Greg, I see you went to Kellogg. I'm a current student. I want to find a way to get in the music industry. Can I bend your ear? So he was incredibly gracious, and he had breakfast with me. He's the guy that introduced me to Jeff McCluskey, who I eventually got that internship with that kicked off my career in the industry. So at that breakfast, he's like, here, I'm going to give you 10 names and their addresses. And I wrote letters. I didn't even send emails. And as we're walking out of this breakfast place in Evanston, Illinois, He's like, by the way, I just got back from South by Southwest and I signed this new artist. Let's run to my car and I'll give you a CD. So we go to his car, he hands me the CD, and then I thank him for his time and I'll let him know that I'll follow up. And as he drives away, I'm thinking to myself, I'm never going to fucking hear of this artist ever again. John Mayer, Root for Squares, of course, right? He was an arena actor in 3 years. Does it show you what kind of ear I have?
I know, and like for so long I tell this story of like, oh, I saw John Mayer when he was in a small 800 cap room before he was anyone. But then I like look back on my memory of that show, and I'm like, he was parked in a tour bus outside of the venue. Like he's something was already happening. I didn't catch him that early, you know. But it was still just like a influential memory of mine. What was the first show you ever went to?
The first, without my parents, the first show I ever went to was oh no, I went with my mom. Loverboy, a band you won't know because you're too young. It was Canadian horrible cheese rock band from the 80s called Loverboy. I saw them at SPAC, Saratoga Performing Arts Center, which to this day is probably my favorite venue in the world, and I go 5 times a year if I can do it.
It's nearby. It's nearby. I'll
That's right. You live in, maybe it's a good idea to just take a minute and tell people about you personally, David, where you live, and you're a new father.
I'm a new father. Yeah, sure. I went to school in New Orleans, similar to you.
But you're from St. Louis, is that right?
From St. Louis, went to school in New Orleans, Tulane, similar to you, like not a great music city, not a great school for getting a job in music. So I transferred to school at USC. That's where I graduated from in LA, and then moved to New York 18 years ago. And during the pandemic, my wife and I bought a home up here in the Catskills, and we get into the city enough to still keep our jobs in the entertainment industry. And then, but we love kind of like the space that we get up here, and the peace of mind and the quiet. But I'm curious about like
baby girl to the world. 3 months. I mean, you're burying the lead here, dude. Like,
oh yes, and running on fumes because we have a baby girl that we just welcomed into the world 3 months ago.
Again.
So I like, speaking of family and travel and moving all around to different cities, like I'm curious about you because like even just your introduction, you were talking about being in Chicago, moving to LA, going to London, going to San Francisco for the Ticket Web role, going to DC for the Nationals. Now you're back in the Connecticut, New York area. Like, and you have 2 7-year-old twins, like, and you're in Canada right now for an event. So like, how do you balance kind of like those decisions, those big, huge life decisions of an amazing opportunity, like to move to London or to take a role with a baseball team and scratch that itch with your role as a father?
I don't know that I have a great answer for you, but I think, look, before I was married and became a dad, it was easy to do those kinds of things. And I got married and had children later in life. I was 40 when I got married and 43 when we had the boys. So up until then, it was just, selfishness. I'm gonna do what makes me happy and what's gonna further my career. And like you said, scratch some itches that I had. London was an easy decision because I felt honored. The Ticketmaster was willing to bet on me that was the first time I really ran a team, for lack of a better word. And I was horrible at it when I first started. I think if you talk to any of the people that were working for me in London today, they'll tell you what a shitty boss I was. I was 32, 33 years old and didn't really know like how to be a human and a compassionate, empathetic person running a business division. And I whatever little power I had went to my head, and that's a story for another time and probably a cocktail. But and then I was in LA for a while. I never moved to San Francisco to run Ticket Web. I ran Ticket Web from LA, and I would fly up to San Francisco once or twice a month. But the decision to take the job with the Nationals and leave LA to go to DC was not an easy one, and it was for a couple of reasons. Well, one is I'd written the business plan for what eventually became Impact Museums, which is the immersive company that ran from 2020 to just recently. And it was taking me longer than I expected it to get that company funded. And the company there was a private equity company in Los Angeles that was willing to back me. They kind of we couldn't get to terms on the investment. So, now it was approaching a year that I've been working on this thing, didn't have any income. I had a house in Playa del Rey and 2 kids and a wife to feed. So, when I got the offer from the Nationals, it served a couple of purposes. One, it gave me a chance to continue to develop impact museums while someone was paying me. And two, like, frankly, I love baseball and had never worked in sports. And I felt it was this big, maybe not big hole in my resume, but certainly that it would help in the future. And if I had had some sports experience in addition to the music experience I'd had. So, and it ended up working out perfectly because impact museums started blowing up during the pandemic when sports teams weren't letting fans back into the stadiums yet and bands weren't on the road yet. The Immersive Van Gogh show, which we'd partnered on with a Canadian company, was the biggest selling event on Ticketmaster in 2021, frankly, because we just didn't have that much competition. And yes, it was a great show. But then as that company took off and I came back into an operating full-time role with that company, we knew we weren't going to stay in DC, Tiffany and I, because we just, didn't have, a real reason to be there. So we went through the calculus of deciding whether we were going to go back to Los Angeles or go to New York, basically what you did, be a stone's throw away from one of the 2 major live entertainment metropolises. And frankly, a lot of things weighed into that decision, but what you can get in the suburbs of New York City for a house versus what you can get in the suburbs of Los Angeles for a house are wildly different. I know that sounds weird to think that New York would be less expensive, but it's significantly so. So just like you, I'm about an hour 15 on the train out of New York. We're in a town in Connecticut called Westport, but traveling has never really bothered me. But now that we purposefully got to Westport just in time for the kids to start kindergarten. And when Brian Perez approached me about this job, AEG and Access are based in Los Angeles. The first question I asked them was, will you let me do it from New York? Because I didn't want to uproot the family. And he was totally cool with it. So I'm on a plane a lot, and that's probably something else we might want to touch on in our last 20 minutes here, is how hard it is to be in a industry that by definition requires you to be someplace as a human. It's called live entertainment for a reason, which means you're away from your family a lot more than you want to be. But so I travel a lot in the role, but the good news for me is that I don't go to an office in Manhattan. When I'm home, I'm home. I'm there to watch the boys get on the bus, and I'm there when they come back. So if I had been in this job in the 80s when everyone was, kissing their wives with their briefcase, and I probably wouldn't have seen the boys in the morning, and I'd be home later than they got to bed. So the way I think about it is, very lucky to be in this role in this day and age.
It sounds like you've been able to create a really good balance between being on the road and spending time with family, and it's great that Access.
I'll let my wife determine whether or not really good is the right adjective, but yeah, there's a balance there. What about you?
I'm 3 months into this. One of those months I wasn't working, and my wife is fantastic and kind of understands just the genuine excitement I get from going to live shows, or like the social nature of this job and building relationships in person versus over Zoom. And we spent time together. Like during her pregnancy, there was a stretch where I needed to be in LA for a variety of things, and we just decided to pick up and move there for 6 weeks. And so me and my wife moved there, and we're trying to turn that into kind of an annual thing where we're going to spend part-time in LA, part-time here, and get kind of the best of both worlds as long as we can. But we're new parents, and childcare and all sorts of things are going to add extra complexity into that. But the short answer is I have a fantastic partner who's really, really supportive of that. But also that even before the pandemic seeded, we built a remote first team. So our software engineers are Vermont, Florida, New York, London, Spain, all over. The majority of our team is based in Nashville, but we do have some other people outside of Nashville. And so, but even before the pandemic, we were spending every day on Zoom together, and we were kind of able to create kind of like a remote for working culture from a internal company standpoint. But obviously there's like some requirements to be on the road for business purposes and expanding.
Look, you said it really, really well. Like, it's really hard to be in this industry with a partner that's not super accommodating and understanding, and you know, it frankly, you can't do it, right? Like, it's because it's just so, there's so much travel. Like, I am probably on the road between 2 and 3 weeks a month, not the entire week. Like, I try to make sure, I'm only away for a full week one of those weeks. But I mean, Tiff is just amazing about, allowing me to do that, and covers the boys and all that stuff. And if you don't have that, I think we're both very fortunate. It's really hard to pull this off, right? It's an industry that has you living on airplanes, and you're in venues until 2 o'clock in the morning. And it sounds glamorous, and look, frankly, a lot of it is, and that's why we got into it. But it's also incredibly taxing.
I couldn't agree more, but we're doing it because it's worth it for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
A few moments ago, there were a couple things that I wanted to double click into, but I know we're kind of running short on time. But you mentioned impact, and I'm curious to learn more about that. But also, you mentioned kind of like your role and quickly scratching that itch to enter the sports world, to kind of like you didn't say for resume building purposes, but more for like experience and adding that extra checkbox to kind of like the extra wrinkle in your brain, or whatever you want to say, like that experience in the baseball space. How, from a ticketing perspective, what did that create? What insight did that give you? I know there was a period where you straight up weren't selling tickets because of COVID, but there are a lot of similarities. There are a lot of things that the industries can learn from each other from a ticketing standpoint. But what were some of the main takeaways from that you're taking kind of back to the rest of the live entertainment world?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I can tell you one thing. Like, if I had stayed in ticketing in 2010, whether I'd stayed with Ticketmaster or immediately gone to another ticketing company, I don't like leaving ticketing for these 14 years that I was gone and doing what I did. But, again, being on the other side of the table, having the weight of inventory risk on your shoulders in a real way. Like, if you're not selling tickets, you're fucking going out of business. I don't think I would be as good as I am, and it's up for debate how good I am in my current job, but I don't think I would be as effective in this role if I had stayed in ticketing my entire career. I think leaving and coming back gives me a perspective when I'm sitting with a client, potential client or current client. I'm in Calgary right now, and I have 4 meetings over the next 24 hours, and I can sit across from a sports team, or I can sit across from a venue, or I can sit across from a concert promoter, and I can say, I get what you're going through, and it's not bullshit, right? Because I've sat in those seats. And what, to answer your question specifically, it's a good question. I would probably need a little bit more time to get my head around. But the idea of, when you're working for a sports team, you are working for usually a billionaire. You're working for an owner with a lot of money, and the dynamics around the decision making in sports are almost not completely different, but they are. There's a distinction between those dynamics and the dynamics you see in the concert industry, because most of the concert industry is owned by companies that are public, or VC funded or whatever, and there's just a little bit more checks and balances that are made in those decisions, because if you're working for Live Nation and you have a concert tour out, Live Nation is public and they report to Wall Street and they have to watch the margins, and there's a democracy around it. Whereas in sports, it's if your owner doesn't want to do it, you're not fucking doing it. So again, I think what that role specifically did for me, first of all, you get to run a building, and that doesn't come with a lot of jobs in this industry. I also got to run buildings when I did the Impact immersive startup. But again, if you look at the value chain, like, I haven't represented talent, and I never will. So that part I'm going to be a miss on. But I've been a promoter. I've run buildings. I've been on the ticketing side of things, and I'm certainly a fan. And that's probably the most important thing I ever am. So I think I don't know, I'm trying to frame this in a way that doesn't make it sound like I'm fucking bragging, but I think it's going to sound that way anyway. The more you can just let the person on the other side of the table know that you genuinely know what it's like to be in their seat and make the kind of decisions they need to make, the more connectivity you're going to have in the room with them. So, I mean, we'll see. I'm still, half a year into this gig, and there's a lot of work to do, but hopefully it starts to resonate, and it has resonated so far.
Yeah, and that makes a ton of sense, that coming into this role at Access, which is now kind of what I would love to dive into with a little bit of our last time. It's like you took that experience from baseball. Now you're working at Access, where you do have sports clients. You do have, buildings that have both other types of live entertainment and consistent recurring sports clients. And I'd love to learn a little bit more about your role as chief revenue officer, and kind of the main buckets of things that you're focusing on in that role, and kind of what you're most excited about and what drew you to that role.
Yeah, thanks. And then I think we need to finish up with some stuff on you, because I've certainly dominated the conversation. So in my role, I mean, it's kind of built into the title. I look after the revenue of the company. So there are 3 divisions that I look after. One is the business development team. That's the team that's responsible for signing new clients. Those clients can be buildings, those clients can be promoters, those clients can be festivals, those clients can be sports teams, leagues, signing new clients into our platform. And also that team is responsible for renewing existing contracts, which is one of the reasons I'm here in Calgary today. The second team is the sponsorships team, and that team is run by Carrie Carson, who also basically serves as my co-pilot in running the entire revenue organization. She's got a background of being an executive at Disney, amongst other very notable media companies, and is just an amazing executive. And then the last division is the resale division. So something we've already touched on today, but secondary ticketing division's run by Brock Moore. So between business development on the primary ticketing side, sponsorships and resale, that comprises the lion's share of the company's revenue. There's a couple small acquisitions that we made recently that don't report into me. And you asked what I was drawn to about it that caused me to accept the role. I mean, first and foremost, our CEO, Brian Perez. If you know him, I don't need to say anymore. He's just one of the brightest. And just, he and I have been friends for a very long time. And he and I tried to find a way to work together maybe a decade ago, and just the timing wasn't right and the role wasn't right. And this time, the stars aligned, which is great. But Brian is someone that I enjoy incredibly working for. And the team he'd built around himself, our president of North America, Tom Andrus, and our international president, Blaine Legier, who I worked with at Ticketmaster for a number of years. He and I are both from Albany, New York, and we're the same age. He went to a high school called Scotia. I went to a high school called Colony, but it's amazing how our lives have kind of mirrored each other. And now we get to work together again at AEG Access. And it was a role, frankly, David, that I had never had before. Like, if you look at what I did at Ticketmaster, I was in charge of talking to the artist community, and then I'm running Ticket Web was kind of similar to what I do now. But like to be in charge of, and that phrase sounds just so crass, but to have the responsibility on my shoulders of convincing stakeholders in the industry to trust us with the facilitation of their business to the fan. It's just a huge responsibility, and something that there was just no way I was going to say no to. And AEG has an incredible reputation. AEG is our parent company, for those that don't know. AEG has an incredible reputation for an amazing culture that I have. It took me all of 2 weeks to see that. So my job is incredibly enjoyable. I haven't had this much fun in a role probably since you and I met at Fullscreen. And I'm just soaking it up. So I'm doing 3 things right now. One is building the team. We made a couple of amazing hires in the past few months. We took Allie McLeod from Dice Ticketing. She was the head of their sales division. She's now looking after festivals, clubs, and theaters, along with Sean Eaton for us. And we just hired Dave McElwee from Elevate Sports Ventures. He was at Ticketmaster before that, and he's going to be, along with Taylor Kern, running our sports business. So the team is getting built. We're crispening and sharpening our strategy. We're going to have a very proactive approach to how we're going to go after the marketplace. And then thirdly, we're bringing our materials and our collateral to that same aspirational place that we feel every day when we wake up. So, that's not an easy thing to do, and it's taking, it takes a while to turn a ship that big, but we're making really good progress. And again, I'm professionally happier than I've been in a very long time. So thank you for asking that question. And I would love to spend the last 5 minutes talking about you and what you see in the future of not only your role at So Far Seated, but more importantly, how you think the fan experience and vis-a-vis ticketing might evolve and change over the next few years.
Yeah, I guess there's my hope for the future and my prediction for the future might be different. I hope they're the same. But it all starts with the artist to fan connection. And I think, it's like I saw an old article that you were quoted in from 2009 where you were doing um, iTunes sales that would result in a pre-sale code that an artist would get. And I was like, that's like, we didn't invent what we're doing, right? It's just the ROI on getting someone to like stream a song in order to get a pre-sale code isn't there. So what artists have realized is there's much more value in asking fan for their data in order, like, join my email list, join my text message list, sign up for this reminder. And, that artist to fan connection, I hope continues to evolve. And as artists, I recognize the role that you're in and the company that you're in, but as artists get more access to that data, that they have more leverage themselves and that they're less reliant on the incumbents or the gatekeepers of their data for things like dynamic pricing, communicating with their fans, marketing shows to their fans. So I think with a lot of excitement around AI, I think a lot of things around fraud detection, around personalization of communication and messaging to fans is going to be huge. The more you understand about the fan, the more you can tailor that message to them. So that's going to be really exciting. Dynamic pricing is going to continue to be huge. Right now, artists rely on one or two major parties to kind of like give them guidance and advice. Like I sit in these war rooms sometimes with 40 people from a promoter, agent, manager, marketing person, ticketing company, our company Seated, and they're making the pricing decisions on the fly based on the demand and the queue and the number of signups that they have through Seated. And so like, I think the more that we empower the artists with that data, then like the less beholden they're going to be to the incumbents, and there's going to be a lot more competition. It's going to be more fruitful. All tides are going to rise, and that's what I hope for the future. We're carving out our little niche for that, and we're going to continue to advocate for artists and partner for artists and build tools for them. And hopefully, there's opportunities to partner with the big companies that do have those exclusive agreements with the venues and work together hand in hand to use that data collectively. And then, so that's kind of like what you can see, what you can touch, what you can feel, and the changes you're going to feel. I think from a business owner perspective, we're already starting to feel some of the stuff of advancements in technology around AI just for like business efficiencies. Like there's obvious stuff like customer support where it's like you can use fewer agents because you can solve more of the problems without involving a human first. Like that's obvious and that's already starting to happen. But like even just this week, we built you think about the nature of our business, it's like so like emails flying and all things coming in all different formats. You get like we get seat locations in all kinds of different formats. We get like everything from a XMAP exporter from Ticketmaster to a CSV to an Excel grid to like a PDF that someone prints out from their printer, like highlights the seats that are allocated to the artist, scans it, and then like emails it to us. And so like we build an AI tool to take in all those formats and normalize it and then upload it to our system to create seat maps. And like that is something that we couldn't have done even a year and a half ago that is saving tens of hours a week for our team building reserve seat shows within Seated. So I think, I'm excited about the things that the fans are going to see, feel, and touch in the developments there. But also from a business owner perspective, I'm excited of like, how can we grow our business in a more efficient way where like, obviously you want revenue to scale faster than costs increase, but like, I think there's worlds where like revenue can grow while costs decrease because of some of these efficiencies. So, I'm excited about technology, and that's kind of where I nerd out and geek out, and we get excited as a team.
Well, I think you touched on it really well, that the opportunities for companies that are smaller, because look, in some ways, there's probably a little competitive dynamic between, I mean, we're both in ticketing, right? but for our companies and companies like ours to partner as they go on, because look, I mean, at the end of the day, it all comes down to the two ends of the value chain, right? The artist and the fan. And I said it before, I'll say it again. We're all in the middle. And if you're not providing services that matter, you go away eventually. I just lost my train of thought on that. Oh no, I got it back. So, I think there will always be this. There's something like, Ticketmaster does a really, really good job, and Access does a really, really good job of selling a fuck ton of tickets in a short period of time, right? And lately there's been some backlash based on some Taylor Swift on sales that Ticketmaster did. But generally speaking, like, the machines work, right? And not everybody can do that. There's a reason why these big companies exist, right? That's hard to do. Where Amazon has tried, failed, and got out of the business. Spotify has tried, failed, and got out of the business. This is tough stuff. But there's also that really, really high touch component that companies like Seated provide. And I think those things not only can coexist, but need to and will always coexist. As long as people are fighting for the two ends of the value chain, the artist and the fan, like, I don't see that changing a whole lot. And all these things that we're talking about, whether it's dynamic pricing or making sure that real fans are getting into the seats, or finding a way to capture the data and get it to the artists, like, those are all means to that end, which is making sure the fan experience is as strong as it can be, and making sure the artist is empowered as much as they can be. So I don't think there's anything there that's at odds.
I think that's a great note to end it on, and I
Yeah,
completely
cherry on
agree.
top, right?
I know Tom wanted to leave some time for questions, but I'll hand it back to Tom.
I don't want this to end. I'd like to go on and on and on. This has been absolute smartest people gold. Some of the wisdom you all have shared about being daddies in music. That's a new organization that you both are going to start. Compliments of someone else in the chat that mentioned mamas in music.
Nice.
No, seriously, guys, you two seem to have, everything going right in both sides of your lives, business and home. So kudos to you. There are a couple of questions that I wanted to talk a little bit about. Vito, one of the things that I'd love to quiz you about, you've got the unique perspective of working both in sports and music, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on now that private equity is coming now into sports in a big way. It's been that's a recent convention. What do you see as changing in that world relative to the music industry, where private equity has been roaming around for years? Do you see any changes?
Well, I mean, look, private equity being in sports isn't super new. It was certainly happening when I only got to the sports industry in 2019. An old high school buddy of mine I saw in the chat said that I lied, and it's not my first job in sports. And thank you, Chris. I was a bad boy for the minor league baseball team when I was in Albany, New York, when I was 14 years old. So technically, I guess it wasn't my first job in sports. But look, I think the introduction of that kind of gravitas and that kind of intelligence into the business, like I said, for so long, these were businesses that, yes, they don't feel from the outside like they're small businesses, because they're on the front page of the websites and on your phone, and there's so much passion behind them. But the truth is, they are mom and pop businesses. And if you talk to people that work in professional sports teams, they will tell you that you're basically running a themed restaurant that charges a cover, right? And that's in the most cynical way. That's the best way you can describe it, because you have a very local business, right? You can't scale. Like, I couldn't have scaled the Washington Nationals to London or Canada or Mexico. Like, that's not possible. You have a geo-fenced territory that you have to stay within. But the idea of private equity, to answer your question more directly, the idea of private equity coming in a bigger way into this space will only continue to make it more sophisticated, because those are investors that require performance. Those are investors that require return, and they don't kind of sit by and just watch you operate the team. Yes, there's always the fan experience that has to stay. They have to stay true to, so you can't juice prices up to the moon. But I do think you're gonna see more forced dynamic pricing. Although sports has always done a pretty good job of it. Frankly, music has been behind on the dynamic pricing stuff. Otherwise, I don't know that I have a whole lot to share on that. I mean, multiple owners of the teams has always existed private equity won't change that a whole lot. Frankly, the thing I see in sports that's very, very interesting is what Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds did with the soccer club. That is now seeming like it's a model that many celebrities are going to try to copy. How do I buy a piece of a team that may not be in the pros, but a league or two down, and I will use my celebrity to help them leverage their promotion because I'm going to be able to sell sponsorships in a more effective way. I can get them broadcast in a much bigger way. And then they ride that appreciation up, and then they can decide whether they want to keep it or sell it. But frankly, to me, that's the thing that it's going to be interesting, because you're starting to see more and more celebrities wanting to copy that model now.
Right. Yeah. Who wants a liquor brand when you can have a soccer club?
Or both in Ryan Reynolds' case.
Right.
Right.
Well, listen, out of respect for yours and everyone else's time, I am going to wrap it up. This has been awesome. I've mentioned in the chat earlier that I've been chasing Vito for over a year to do this. So thank you for slowing down and finally allowing me to wrangle you at the Calgary Stampede of all places. David,
Thank you, Tom.
congratulations on all your success. 40 under 40, 30 under 30, whatever under whatever, you are a badass. And so keep going, man. Just keep going. The audience,
you,
you
Tom.
got exactly what I promised today, and that is you're leaving more enlightened and more inspired than you arrived. And so with that, I wish everyone a safe and cool weekend wherever you happen to be. And we'll see you sometime soon out there. Cheers, folks.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Tom.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.